You might do your own research. You might think this might be the next big thing, right? It could be, a trend you're picking up. Learn about it, right? No one is stopping you from actually deep diving. If someone had said a few years ago that NFTs would be big, and they did a deep dive into it and they started to do something, then they would have probably been doing okay right now, right? So you never know what's going to be the next big thing. The great thing is you have access to everything. If I want to learn about, like I said, machine learning or NFTs or anything in an afternoon, it's possible. That wasn't possible, back before. So, just remember there are no barriers, right? Like you said very well, Mark, to actually learning, right? It's like we have an open resource here. So if you want to learn about something that you think could be more relevant than what's in the formal education system, or it's something you have a passion for.
The show where we talk about data science in the Caribbean, highlighting practical ways that you can learn, get involved, and create your own impact using artificial intelligence and machine learning. This is the Caribbean Data Science Podcast with Mark Moyu and Jeff Sayon.
All right, Jonathan, welcome to the show. I'm very grateful that you came on today. I know you're a very busy man.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for the time. And thanks for the audience as well for taking the time to listen in.
Fantastic. So tell us kind of where you're residing in the world at the moment and what problems you're trying to solve at work.
Yeah, so right now I'm in London in the UK. And, in terms of problems, where do I start? I think, the main thing that we are focused on, in my role as CEO of GEOTree, would be to scale what's called the voluntary carbon markets. And just to unpack that a bit, we're talking about essentially corporates who want to get to net zero. They obviously try to do as much as they can internally to decarbonize. But if there's a kind of residual carbon footprint, they would typically go and offset, right? And these offsets are tied to specific projects. Typically, it could be a tree planting project. It could be a regenerative agriculture project. It could be mangrove restoration, for example. And they typically tend to be in countries where obviously land and climate's available to do that. But obviously to make sure that is real and actually happening, there needs to be a monitoring layer. And this is where we leverage satellite imagery, remote sensing, AI, of course, and cloud compute to actually make sure that, the end buyers on the market overall has confidence that, these projects are taking place, they're doing what they're meant to be doing, and then everyone is happy and we can actually tackle climate change in a credible way. So that's, GEOTree, company I am CEO of, a spin out of a company, Mantle Labs, which I am president of as well. And again, this is all around satellite imagery being the input data, let's say. But the output is slightly it's a bit different from GEOTree in the sense that, we're solving a problem of a lack of data when it comes to providing financial services to farmers in particular. And here we have many farmers all over the world who, don't have historical records, financial records, or for example, or even production records. And if they want loans, for example, or insurance, there's no data for, someone to assess their credit profile, in the way like, if you and I have our credit card history or our bank statements, right? So here we're leveraging against satellite data to go back in time, to see for a particular location, a plot of land, a farm, a field, what the production volatility is, and therefore make that as a proxy for credit profile of the farmer, because obviously their income, their ability to pay back a loan, or the likelihood they're going to claim on insurance is very well tied to the production risk, right? And therefore we're making these indices which are used by banks to credit score or for insurers to underwrite insurance products, and solving that kind of data, a lack of data problem, we're using alternative data, i.e. the satellite data in the end. So, in kind of nuanced in a way, different ways to tackle two big problems. We're talking about 600 million farmers globally in the world. 2 billion dependents, on top of that. So sort of not using satellite data. And also obviously on the climate side, I don't have to tell your listeners, about the urgency of that issue. And here we're kind of, leveraging the satellite data to unlock a bottleneck in terms of scaling these projects, making sure they're financed and that the market overall is actually confident that the emissions reductions or removals are actually taking place. So, hopefully that gives a bit of feel for what I am up to at the moment, Mark.
Yeah, I think you hid some of those details from me when you first explained it, because the impact on farmers and I think on a local, regional level across the globe is not something that I think there's lots of data that people speak to some degree. And, you've heard stories of lots of farmers committing suicide as well because they can't finance these monoculture type farms to really push certain things. And it's really great that you're tackling that problem. Can you maybe comment on how the problem becomes harder in more remote regions versus larger regions, like let's say the US? Like a small farm in the US is very different to a small farmer in India, a small farmer in the Caribbean, and what should maybe folks like that be thinking in terms of just that problem in general?
Yeah, it's interesting. You kind of linked, the things like farmer suicide and the remote part of it as well, and different geographies. So, for one, this kind of technology and the approach of Mantle Labs, which we're kind of talking about here, started out of a need in India, funnily enough. Okay. Two of the co-founders, Indian origin, work very closely with banks over there. There's this thing called priority sector lending where they have to lend to farmers. But great. They do have this, the banks that has had this like a lack of data, like I was speaking to before. So, in terms of them giving the farmers actually affordable credit, and actually the bank themselves being comfortable with their portfolio risk, I think this is where, we saw the power of this data being truly coming into its own in a way, because actually it doesn't matter, from a satellite perspective, whether a farmer is located in India or in Tobago or wherever else, or in the US, right? Satellites, these satellites revisit the Earth every point once a week. We have data archives going back decades, thanks to NASA and the European Space Agency and other providers as well. So I think that's where actually it kind of democratizes access to financial services, no matter where you are. The banks do have this option to actually leverage these kind of data. And I think the insurance aspect is also a huge thing as well. You could imagine, coming back to things like climate change, a lot of farmers, growing in regions, whether it's close to the equator or wherever else, actually not necessarily close to the equator, many farmers globally are feeling the impacts, because obviously, essentially they're growing, their factory is outside, right?
Yeah.
So they're on the front lines of increased drought and other kinds of issues related to climate change. So that's why it is also important to bring in this element of insurance, affordable insurance to many of these farmers. But at the same time, I use that factory analogy. I think people like to also say that it's a factory on the roof, so to speak, in agriculture.
Ooh,
that's
okay.
how we can leverage remote sensing, right? And we can see everywhere. We can understand the risk, and we can actually, give farmers more tailored solutions for that. So yeah, that's kind of the story there. I don't know if
that's an incredible mission, man. I'm a big proponent of having some kind of plot of land where you could grow your own food, because I think that's where the next sort of global control mechanism is. If I could control your water, I could control your food supply to some degree. I've sort of owned you. And great. So I wanted to shift slightly. We're going to come back to some of these topics. We do the show to encourage people from the Caribbean region to pursue data-driven careers. You and I went to school together in high school, and you studied economics, if I remember correctly. And now you're running a deep learning company. So what do you think is the impact of machine learning and tech on the Caribbean region? And what should people be paying attention to at home and just in general about the region?
I mean, first of all, Mark, I would, take a step back and really, I'm amazed by the pace of change and innovation and evolution we are seeing right now. Obviously we went to high school together, but I remember when, my family we bought our first computer off your family, right?
Yeah.
So if you can imagine, I think that was in 97, right? So that, I mean, it's 25 years ago now, right?
We're getting old, way.
So back then we're talking about Web 0, right?
Mm-hmm.
Back in Web 0. Now we're talking about Web 3. Maybe at some, you could explain to your listeners what Web 1, 2, and 3 are, because everyone I hear, every podcast has a different slant on what those iterations are.
Yes.
But, what I see for the Caribbean region, though, just going back to your question, is, an increased opportunity outside the confines of what the traditional economy was, the typical organizations, the structures, everything, right? I remember growing up studying economics, the avenues for potentially working, like in Trinidad, you think, or working in like, one of the major banks or central bank, Ministry of, finance or wherever, or a development economics institution or DFI. But I think right now with all the technology and innovation and evolution we are seeing, it really does, make a difference in terms of the way you can monetize your time, your talent, your expertise. You could, entrepreneurship is probably wide open to anyone now. Capital also, by that measure, is also kind of universal, much more so now than before. So I think, it really does open the door to people who are probably the age of, when we met. I mean, it really is, they used to say back in the day, oh, the world is your oyster and all that. But I really think it is true now more than at any time, in history. So it's an exciting time, I think, no matter where you are. I really hope that, people actually grasp that opportunity. And we talk about deep learning, obviously, machine learning and AI has evolved and will continue to evolve, but we have all these other technologies, obviously, like, blockchain technologies, and all the stuff that comes out of that, NFTs, DAOs, all these other things that, people never heard of, 2 years ago, let alone 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So, it's just such a fertile ground, I would say, now, for people who want to get into whatever sector that interests them, and potentially monetize and make a career out of it. That's kind of my take of it from a very high level, I would say.
No, that's fantastic. And I like the fact that you're calling out that people should be thinking global and reaching out for certain opportunities that are not necessarily there at home within the current industries. And, you highlighted what would have been the career path for me in economics in Trinidad and Tobago. And to some degree, you would have been limited, right? And you went to, the financial capital of the world, or one of the big ones. I guess, is New York bigger than the UK in terms of financial capital?
They always jostle for who's number one. It's one of the top for sure. But Mark, before I forget, I think actually I missed out something there, and tying back to education. I mean, it's amazing now how easy it is to learn, and the availability of resource to learn things at the moment, right? I remember back when we were at school together, and I think Google was just kind of launching in a way, and this search was accessible, and you could find a bit more information. I remember having physical like encyclopedias. I remember going to the library and these things, National Library. To read some stuff. I mean, now it's amazing, right? You have your phone, you have YouTube, you have podcasts. I mean, the wealth of information on your fingertips is just mind-boggling, right? So if you want to learn anything around, deep learning, machine learning, any topic under the sun, you could go on YouTube and find it, right?
Yes.
You can literally learn about a topic in an afternoon if you really spend the time on it. You go on Coursera or whatever as well. So I think, going back to, because, you emphasize the thing about me studying economics as well. And I was definitely going down, a particular route. I studied maths, further maths, economics, history. That was my thing. But I think right now, you don't have to limit yourself to anything, particularly even if you have economics, whatever you studied. There's material out there that could assist you in learning about any topic you want, right? And I think that's another exciting evolution that's happened. Really the open access in a way of to education. I think that is really a transformation.
You brought up Web 3, Web 1, Web 0, Web 2, and underlying all of that is this concept of the internet. And I heard a quote from someone that said the access to information is not the issue, right? It is really the desire to learn. And something in that statement really stuck with me, because at least people will reach out for certain things. And with a podcast like this, to some degree, we're reminding people at home or wherever, like, if you want to go do something, you can definitely do it. You can become an expert to some degree without going to school, right? I'm not a big sort of fan of the traditional educational institutions, just because I think they sort of box your thinking to some degree. So I wanted to ask the question around, let's maybe dive into your career journey, okay? Starting back from high school. So I kind of know how you were in high school, but describe yourself as you would see it, and I'll probably give my filtered version on what that was. And I think the one thing I want people to take away from this interview with you that I've admired for a long time is you knew where you wanted to go very early on. And you and I, like, we would get to school at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and you are like the model student, just studying, reading economics. I would see you reading The Economist. I'm like, what the hell is this man doing reading Economist? And you're a teenager. So yeah, start us from there and tell us what your vision was, etc.
Yeah, it's interesting because you remember that kind of aspect of things, Mark, right? But I'll just emphasize, everyone kind of runs their own race in their own pace to an extent, right? It's not like I came into St. Mary's as like one of the top 100 people in like common entrance exam. I wasn't in like that class. Was it 2.9 or whatever that skipped a year or anything like that, right? I don't think I was even. I don't even know if I was in the top 10 of my class in Form 1 or in Form 2. But I think over time, obviously, well, for one, obviously sometimes you have teachers that really, inspire you for a topic. I think I definitely had that in St. Mary's to go down that path with economics and history to a certain extent. But I think sometimes you just find a particular subject matter that really, makes you want to learn more and delve deep into it. And I think, using that as a way to and making parallels to the situation now, I would say is for someone in high school or wherever it is. Now as well, if you have any subject that you want to learn, whether it's on the curriculum or not, now you're able to learn it at your own pace as well, in your own time, whenever, right? So, but obviously, going back to what you were saying, Mark, yes, I was reading The Economist and the FT, but that was by Form 6 though, right? So that was very much by the end of the journey. I don't think I was doing that in Form 2 or 3. But yeah, I think, something kind of clicked going into like those exams, GCSEs and all that. And I thought, I like the subject matter. This is something I want to dedicate my time to. And that was really it. St. Mary's was a facilitating place for that, as you know. So, and that allowed me to obviously come and study in the UK as well. And then get a career where I was working in the financial markets for quite a while. just funny enough, I was trading agriculture initially.
Yes.
So actually using satellite imagery again, that was my intro into satellite data.
Hmm.
But the application there was to model crop production,
Okay.
the main growing areas, and taking a view on the financial markets tied to those crops. So, a bit of a different take. But yeah, I guess, another story or takeaway I'll get from that is that, sometimes it's not like a linear path as well, right? It's not like, I left and I said, what, I want to get into technology or anything like that, right? Sometimes things just kind of fall into place over time as well. And it goes back to that story. Like sometimes you don't have to look at your neighbor and think, oh, they have it easy and they've, really, they're killing it. Sometimes you have to, go at your own pace, learn what you want to learn and write your own chapter, I guess, to a certain extent, right?
Yeah, it's great that you bring that out because I think I've seen several people that I went to school with. And I think when you go forth to do a PhD, it's quite a lonely, drudgery type journey where you sit in a room and you might have other people that you're slaving away with to try to escape the system, so to say. And, you see people not necessarily pursue as high education, making money, etc., etc. So it's good that you kind of call that out for especially folks who are just beginning their careers. One thing that stuck out to me in your journey, you found this sort of alignment with history and economics in high school, and you said, all right, I'm going to double down on this because I have some notion of a passion for it. And you went to school in University College London. Is that correct?
Yep.
And tell us about, what your time was like there. That's probably one of the top schools in the UK for economics, correct?
Yeah. I mean, funny enough, the year I started there, it was number one in the UK for economics.
Wow.
It's probably, around the top, few. But I think, so I studied economics and statistics there. It's interesting, obviously, moving from the Caribbean and being in a place like London, obviously, right? It's a real, people in Trinidad, I think Trinidad is such a melting pot of people. But when you really look, from outside, people look different, but they're very similar in many ways, Trinidadians, right? But when you go to someone like London, any big city, you see it, I guess, in the US as well, such a varied mix of people from all backgrounds all over the world. So that was a bit of a bit of an eye opener, I guess, initially. But I think, being in a place like London as well, exposes, I got exposed to investment banks. It's a concept that was kind of anathema to me before actually coming to the UK. In Trinidad, you have, RBC or whoever, if they're still there, doing some investment banking, but, to do things like, trading financial markets and all the other aspects as well. That was a real eye opener and whilst I was studying, I was always interning. So I interned in my first year in this first summer. I was in Citibank in Canary Wharf in London. That's like, the heart of the financial industry, I guess, now in London. Second year, I interned at Goldman Sachs. I was in commodity. I was in trading. So that's another thing as well, being somewhere like here during the time I studied, I was able to mix in, work and be able to work for some pretty top organizations, getting, good experience. These kind of companies give young people a lot of work and I'd say responsibility very early as well. So that was a baptism of fire for sure. Okay. But yeah, anyway, that's kind of the background there, I guess, if that helps.
And how would you describe your mentality going from high school then to, St. Mary's College was one of the top schools in the nation, but I think that particular rigor in St. Mary's versus, or high school, for those who don't know what St. Mary's is, to, University College London, and then getting internships at these top banks. And the culture of banking, at least from the reputation standpoint, is go. You're on go the whole time. And so kind of describe for listeners, especially who have not been in the banking field, what that was like.
Yeah. And I think, it's like being extracted from somewhere, it's almost like being an alien and landing on Earth to a certain extent, right?
Okay.
Because the environment is so different. Especially the first time, I remember the first time I walked on the trading floor, and just the magnetism, the electricity I was like, wow, this is somewhere I really need to work. People standing, shouting on phones, and just the buzz was,
So
something.
the shit you see on TV is like real.
I probably slightly exaggerated, but and I think especially now it's probably calmed down a fair bit versus when I started as well.
Okay.
But definitely, I think it really was a new environment. I think the good thing for me is that it felt fairly meritocratic in a way, right? So you go in, if you know your stuff, people would respect you if you did your work, if you delivered. It seemed like an environment where, versus many other kind of environments, I would say, where it's probably more relationship focused, and that in itself breeds a kind of structural rigidity in a way. I felt like banking and trading in particular, because at the end of the day it kind of boiled out to the numbers.
Yes,
I think it was a more kind of open and potentially meritocratic environment. So that was a positive, right? I never felt like as someone coming from the Caribbean or anything like that I was limited in any way.
That's incredible.
So yeah, but it was the growth. I think you got it, especially around the times when I was involved. I mean, this is right before Lehman.
Oh yeah, so you actually went through that.
Yeah. So I remember it was the first time I entered that city. That was just where we started 2007. We started to hear about the cracks. I remember my friend Alex Cave, who from Barbados origin. I think I introduced you to him.
Yes,
he was an intern there as well. I said that he was the first person who told me about, there could be something here, credit crunch or whatever. And then obviously, by the following year, I was interning at Goldman, and that was right before everything just went kind of pear-shaped with Lehman and the bankruptcy going on. So on the flip side, I think I missed out probably the golden era of working at a bank because we kind of had, years of credit crunch and kind of downturn during that time. But yeah, still a great environment to kind of get in, learn, start your career, I think.
And what would you say to students thinking about that particular path, right? And one of the things I wanted to make sure we highlight is you're the CEO of a machine learning company that's involved or has some proxy relation to the financial markets. And a lot of the experience, it seems like, that you had gained along your career path was almost positioning you for that to some degree. And I know that's probably not necessarily intentional. As you're saying, things evolve. But what's the message there for someone thinking about going into the banking sector now versus when you had initially gone in?
Yeah, well, I could speak definitely more towards especially like things like trading and financial markets. Yes. I think the skill set of people coming in now is very different from when I started. Now, you look at the job specs, and I think there are also people who have experience with Python and, all this kind of stuff. I think when I started, there was no much. I mean, Python was just a snake, right? That didn't exist. So, I think we really. I remember actually using R on the trading floor, our studio. The statistical language.
Yes.
And I was the only person there. And I wrote. We made a book to train people. To actually, how to use R, how to do some basic regression analysis, all this kind of stuff. But I think definitely now the technical requirement and expectation is a lot higher. They expect people who want to, probably it's less of that shouty environment kind of personality, but more someone with the kind of technical expertise to actually execute, do some data analysis, especially that kind of the data science thing, right? I mean, that's your podcast, right? So everyone wants someone to have some kind of data science component to them, right? They don't have to be, the best programmer in the world or anything, but they have to understand the process at least of, taking raw data and transforming it in some way, getting some kind of understanding of what, what could be learned from that data and translating that into the financial markets or whatever environment that is. So I think that being said, I see the convergence, I guess, That's what I have seen between, like finance, technology, data science, all these things are kind of converging now, I'd say. So that's why we see things like fintech, right, which is big.
Yes.
Before when I started, it was, that concept wasn't really around, right? But now that's probably one of the biggest industries in terms of VC money going into an area in technology. And we continue to see that in other industries, whether it's healthcare or, automotives. We've seen that obviously.
Right.
So, whatever technology, it's almost like now you can have a base in terms of your skill set and knowledge around data science or different aspects of computer science more generally. And from there, you could really, get into whatever area potentially interests you. Or maybe if you want to get into the hot area now, then yeah, that's, then you could really see where you can apply your base and your knowledge. But I think it really does open the door to a lot more areas for more people in a way, right?
Most certainly. And I'm happy that you call that particular thread out, because I think most people, when they think about studying data science, they're like, oh, I want a job as a data scientist. And
Right.
they sort of just hope that certain things would happen. Whereas, data is just data. So
Yeah.
And at NVIDIA, I'm very fortunate, or it's a very interesting experience working for a company where if you work for a fintech company, okay, you are only in finance. And I think one of the things I've experienced in my career is I've worked within a specific industry like the railroad. So you learn in depth about the complexities, the business constraints, et cetera. And now I worked in search and recommendation. So everybody has data to search over. So you work with a finance firm, you work with a healthcare firm. So you get to see how things shift across different domains. And so as a data scientist, I think it's very important to underscore the point that you made, that you have that base skill and you can sort of essentially go anywhere. So as a trader, your job is to obviously make money for your firm by doing X amount of research, and the power of the human mind to take in all of this data, have some particular intuition, and then execute a profitable trade. How much of that intuition now, coupled with this programmatic skill of doing data analysis, what's the mix there that people should be paying attention to? Because I think data scientists might just rely on, hey, let me just go do what the data is telling me to do, and probably ignore the real human intuition. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, definitely, Mark. There's room for everything on that spectrum.
Okay.
In my experience, you have people who, especially when it comes to commodities, for example, which is my market, things like, energy, I was focused on, agriculture. So like corn, soybean, sugar, coffee, that kind of, I used to trade those markets in particular. And we always have like fundamentals, right? So it's like economics in a way. You have demand, you have, people need to, eat wheat or whatever it is. And you can, all that demand over time is probably fairly static with a growth rate, but you need to understand that side of things. But then there's the supply component, right? And again, with, just using crops as an example, that could be, based on weather, which could impact on yields, obviously. And you have to look during the growing season and understand what's happening there. So you have that fundamental analysis, and you do have people who are very much on the spectrum of, and I'm going to have my S&D, as it's called, supply and demand, and think about the numbers, talk to farmers, understand what the weather forecast is saying, look at when the growing season is for corn, for example, and go about the markets that way. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, I've had spoken to people and known people, good friends of mine, who ignore the fundamentals and kind of like what you say. You chuck in the data, the price data, historical data, look at, and that kind of could tell you some information as well, right? That could tell you the seasonality, for example, and these kind of things. And, to kind of answer your question, I think there's room for every kind of approach within financial markets. And that's what makes a market, right? You can't have groupthink necessarily all the time and everyone is thinking on one end. But I think it's increasingly now, versus before, I think there's definitely a shift more towards a data-centric kind of approach. Even if the fundamental analysis, for example, you could incorporate more of that kind of, tech data science related approach to it, right? Good example is, when I started, and to a certain extent now, people will go around doing these crop tours, for example. Go on a pickup truck, six pack, there, and drive around the Midwest, talk to farmers over the course of a month or two and get a feel for the crop, right? Well, obviously now with satellite imagery, like I was describing before, that's probably not necessary, let's say. We have the open factory as we described it. Yes. So, you can start to incorporate those kind of data into your analysis and thinking. And if you have some clever data science or someone in your team who has that kind of expertise, then maybe you can get some insights a bit quicker than otherwise. So
yes,
you have a potential merging of the fundamentals, and people kind of, I think the term that some people coin is a quantamental approach. So a bit of quantity. Yeah, exactly. And a bit of fundamentals. And that's a thing in financial markets as well, especially with commodities. But yeah, I think, it still doesn't mean that everything goes all on the data necessarily. Yes. And, there's still a room for everything, but it's very interesting to see that side really pick up, I would say, Mark.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the things that strikes out to me as a data scientist, growing in my own career, is the value that you bring as a data scientist oftentimes is your intuition, because everyone else has access to the same programs, the same APIs that you can call to run all these algorithms. It's just who has the data that you can actually get something more useful, and then the creativity that you bring to the table as someone who's doing science on data. And I think I had a chemical engineering background, so when you think of chemical engineering, you're just taking literally a bunch of chemicals and producing a product. And with data science, it's almost the same thing. You're taking just a bunch of weird binary numbers and making it useful for somebody. So it's great that you call that out. So you did a master's, University of Oxford, okay? And you also did an MBA at the University of Cambridge. So you and I had an interesting side conversation around MBAs. Tell us about your experience there. Those are two very top institutions. So it seems like you aim for the top, and tell us mentally what that was like in terms of your outlook and the attitude that you went into. I think that's very important. And in addition, why you chose to pursue those degrees.
Yeah, it's a good question. So let me just unpack firstly Oxford. And it ties back to St. Mary's. I always enjoyed economics and read books around development economics. And, really, I think with A-level economics in particular, the theory was really, the meat of it, right? Okay. And really see how it was applied in the real world. Now, university level economics, and, I'm sure you have a few listeners who studied economics who might agree, at the university level, especially undergraduate, and I did economics and statistics, so probably even more skewed. It's very mathematical and very theoretical in a way, at least in my experience. So literally my economics degree became more about the algebra, the equations, the matrices, and less about the people and the goods and services and the like, and the governments, So I always thought, I would still like to do an additional layer of study around economics, but still making it still a bit more applied to what I was interested in. So that's why I applied to do development economics. At Oxford, I'd read a book, The Bottom Billion, by Professor Sir Paul Collier. He was teaching at the time part of the development economics degree there. So I applied. I knew I was going to go back into banking, but I thought, I'm going to do this degree before that because it's really what interests me. So apply, got in. It was a great experience because it took me again back. I mean, there was still some of the maths again, like you can't get away from it. But it still took me back to, again, more the thinking, the applied economic side of it, the real people, especially development economics, right? So funny enough, I did my, I think my thesis was on Caribbean integration and a few things. Okay. But I think one of the key things that really stuck out to me, and it's tied to some of the stuff we just discussed, is the concept of, for example, poverty traps, right? So for whatever reason, Yeah. For whatever reason, whatever friction there is in the system, certain people, whether it's a farmer who can't access credit, for example, there's something that that keeps people away, unable to essentially go to the next rung when it comes to economics and development and their own financial security and well-being, right? Because we have a concept of society of I guess, a bit of a ladder, right? There's a ladder you can probably ascend, whether it's via education or even something like getting a loan to finance you, adding a few machines to your factory, get more revenue in, scale from there. VC is a good example. You have an idea now, Mark. You go and talk to someone, in Silicon Valley, they come and give you a big check, Mark's off to the races. All that kind of things, right? Imagine there's a scenario where, that doesn't exist. And basically you're there like a farmer somewhere and you're living from year to year. You're not going to get access to a loan to get better quality seeds to improve your yield. There's no loan to give you a better machinery or whatever. You're still using animals, for example, or your own hand to do the main task. And you're kind of there and just existing, but with no chance of progressing and getting out of that supposed trap. And God forbid if something happened where there were a drought and you lost one of your crops, one of your harvests, and then you probably even go down, let's say. So there's a concept of a poverty trap. It's kind of like a cycle where you can't really get out of. And this is where, something that really, I studied that, I read it in the book, The Bottom Billion. You hear about it in the economic theory. And then, I saw it again, and this kind of is part of my journey now, where, using alternative data, like I was saying, we're in essence able to kind of put that ladder there that wasn't there before, right? We're using data to be able to open the door to the financial services, to the insurance, right? So just kind of linking, I'm just trying to make a link here, right, Mark, between what I was studying there and what you see in the real world. That's an interesting thing actually as well. Sometimes you do learn things, you read things, you study things, and inadvertently it pops up in another part of your life. And you could see how, hopefully you're not making things worse, but you could see potentially how you're improving a particular situation. And I think technology actually does play a big role in, that's what technology should be really for, right? That's the essence of technology, which is about, I guess, if we were to be a bit philosophical about it, improving in a way the human condition, stopping, removing pain points. We could talk about tech from a perspective of, making nice apps to, put emojis or whatever, right? There's that side of tech, obviously. But I think a lot of tech, at least in theory, should be around or is around solving some real issues. And that's where we could see, some of the historic and documented problems that we've had globally, climate change, another one as well, are being solved with technology in different ways, right? And I think that's another, I don't even know how I got down that rabbit hole now.
It's a good, I think it's a good
just
rabbit hole.
Some context there.
Because you're tying in sort of your love for economics in addition to you going after a very meaningful problem, right? I think oftentimes when people go to school for intellectual curiosity, it very seldom leads to some significant impact, I think, on people's lives outside of that, other than, hey, I really explored this project, or even in your theses that you do for school, it's just a report, right? Whereas in a lot of the work that you're doing now, I think it's actually pushing into the real world, which is exciting. Talk about MBA, right? What were your deciding factors on doing it? Like I've been thinking about doing it, not doing it, and open to that discussion.
Yeah, so just to give the chronology, so obviously I did my master's at Oxford, the MSc, right after studying at UCL. Went and after Oxford went into banking full time.
Okay,
right?
So full time, understood.
So I had an offer already from the prior internship. So started full time doing the trading. Did that for quite a few years actually. over a decade. And at that point, I was thinking, you know what, I could see some of the, there's always a kind of, joke, or not necessarily a joke, but a kind of threat in the trading world that, you'll be replaced by robots, let's say, right?
I see. Okay.
But anyway, besides that, which, to me, I wasn't really scared of, because I already had some kind of, I used to have basic understanding of data science, and I was applying that, and I could see that part of things really shaping up. I think I saw, the increasing role of technology, to be honest, and tech as a sector and as an opportunity to really grow business, start a business for one, if I want to, or join a business and scale a business, right? So that's why I did have that curiosity. I knew that I didn't necessarily want to just, pull the brakes on my career at the time, right? So I thought, what, with an MBA, sometimes there's a huge opportunity cost, because if you're doing a full-time degree, you have to obviously, you lose your earnings, and then you have to pay. So it's like a double cost for a lot of people. I think, depending on your situation, that's not a problem, obviously, and the experience you can get from being a full-time MBA student, I think could be very enriching, especially if you're earlier on in your career. But by the stage I wanted to do my career and do my, to do my MBA, I think I was very much set that, this is something I wanted to do, on a kind of part-time basis, in concert with my, existing job. And that would allow me to make the transition, afterwards as well, and not have the opportunity cost of lost earnings and all that. So that's why, I did the executive MBA at Cambridge. It was 1 weekend a month. It was great because, Cambridge, from a kind of tech perspective, is a real hub. Got the biggest engineering department in the UK, one of the leading engineering departments in the world. Got a big computer science hub. It's really a leader when it comes to that kind of thing, side of things. So I was able to, do my MBA, but also sneak off to the engineering, meet a few people there, meet some, professors in robotics, and go to the Dyson lab and all these kind of cool things as well. Make some connections, like, Professor Andrew Blake as well, who's chief scientific advisor at Mantle Labs, all these kind of people, and the ecosystem. That's another aspect I wanted. So, that's why I specifically chose Cambridge. But also, like I said, I did want to just pull the stop on my career at the time. So that's why it was more on a part-time basis. And the flexibility we have now as well, with many courses which are, in other in universities, which are either online or on a weekend or whatever it is we have that flexibility, I think, now, a lot of us, to be able to choose how we want our education delivered as well. So yeah. Now, in terms of what I benefited, a great network. I think even just being able to pull to have every now and then stop and learn something new, different. The exposure, I think, was, after 10 years, especially working on financial markets.
Yes.
And it's tough for me to emphasize, to overemphasize how kind of siloed your thinking can become, because I was trading corn and soybeans, two specific markets. Okay. I was living and breathing, where these things were grown, the crop cycles, the key risks, the key buyers, the key sellers. That was my world, right? So just to take a step out of that world and see, the other side of things and other kind of, businesses, considerations, market sectors, that in itself was a breath of fresh air, I think, and allowed me to pursue this new career path where I'm on, where I'm still linking into some of the stuff I learned before in my career around financial markets. Satellite imagery, the use cases for that, things like carbon markets, agricultural markets, all these kind of things which I was exposed to before. But obviously now with, at least obviously there's a bit of business education that went on. Yes. But I think, to be honest, even more importantly, a bit more perspective of different things that I could be incorporating into my thinking as well. And a great network of friends and contacts all over the world. So that was my kind of experience.
So yeah, I'm happy you keep harping on. I heard the word networking a couple of times in that last sharing. one of the hypotheses that we have with the show is that given that we come from a multicultural background, and you did make an interesting distinction that it's multicultural from a view, but not necessarily from a culture, right? So everybody's kind of acting the same; they just look different. However,
You think that's correct, by the way, Mark. What do you think? Is that unfair?
no, I think that's I didn't think about it that way, but I was like, oh yeah, because we talk the same, the accent's the same, you're just like, oh, you just have a different race. Okay, cool, like whatever. And the idea that now we got into the larger world, like the Londons, or well, I'm in Florida, that's no big world, but where we see people who are of different races and of different cultures, and now we have to integrate with them in the workplace. How has your Caribbean heritage allowed you to navigate different networking circles, or how has that led to you developing maybe stronger networks? And you said you went to all of the robotics departments, et cetera, et cetera. What would you say to folks who have that background, and if not, what was your philosophy on networking in general?
I think one thing I would say though is, and I don't know how applicable it is, for most of the Caribbean. But obviously,
Sure.
when it comes to Trinidad, for example, obviously, I feel that the multicultural aspect does, mentally for me anyway, I felt at home talking to people with themselves, different races, cultural backgrounds, or geography backgrounds as well. So I think there was that component to it where, for example, if someone was, Indian background or Chinese or whatever it was, I did feel like, some kind of association or it wasn't, I didn't feel like this was something new to me in a way. So yes. I don't know if that, so there is that aspect to it, which I think maybe that's more unique to like Trinidad or Ghana or wherever it is, but there was that aspect. Now, I think networking more generally is an interesting one because, for one, I mean, there's an interesting Caribbean network, and we continue to kind of unlock that as well, I guess, as we continue to talk globally.
Yes.
I mean, it's amazing when you think about I think the Caribbean's number one export, to be clear, is people, right? I mean, we just export people on a massive scale. I think I saw a stat that like something like twice the amount of Jamaicans are outside of Jamaica than actually in Jamaica, for example. I don't know how that came about. Yeah.
Wow.
There's just a lot of people out there, even if they're not like, okay, maybe they weren't born in the country, but in terms of diaspora and everything else as well, there's a huge, pool of people out there with that background. So I think, from that kind of network perspective, I'm constantly surprised to find out that there's someone who's in a top tech company or a VC or, in banking, who has, a Caribbean background or to be honest, even a Trinidadian background. I've come across, every now and then I find someone and it's like, they have Trinidadian background or whatever. So I think that's one kind of interesting angle. I think in terms of networking more generally, one thing I would say to people, and obviously you have people on your call, on the show listening who, probably early stage of their careers to a certain extent. One part is, people throughout your career, it's and even from your high school, university days, it's amazing how they can pop back in to your life, right? And maybe this is an example here, right, Mark?
It's a perfect example.
It's a perfect example, but even, whether it's a former boss, from a colleague, former university classmates, high school, whatever it is, people, it's amazing, unexpectedly can pop up, could be very helpful as well. So, really emphasizes something which I try to tell people now, which I've learned myself through practice in a way, is not to burn bridges.
Yes.
You could leave a company, maybe you were upset, maybe there was some kind of disagreement. I would say, make sure that, when you do leave or if you do, stop university or whatever, that, your contacts are kind of intact, let's say. And you try and maintain and nurture those relationships, because especially I think now we're becoming a more networked world in a way, right? And you can see it very visually now. You have someone, you can see who they're connected to, all these kind of things. So I'd say that's one aspect I would say when it comes to networking, because you mentioned that point, and I think it's not a bad thing to be very well networked. It doesn't hurt you, right? So
Nope, not
quite the
at all.
contrary. So I would say make sure you're kind of cognizant that you need to maintain that, and that's something which I think people who are successful tend to be in the camp of being very well networked and knowing how to plug into that, maintain those relationships, and thrive together.
Yeah, and I think this call is kind of weird for me, right? Because we sort of grew up in your formative years as teenagers together in school, so you get to see different sides of people, and I think it would be fantastic to show us like our teenage versions of us interviewing, and we're just absolute idiots to some degree, right? Just doing super things as when you're young and exciting, to coming to now, right, where you're a CEO of a deep learning company that is having tremendous impact. And one of the extra stories I wanted to add to what you said was, you don't know when a previous connection will resurface and what that could manifest. So somehow I ended up at NVIDIA. Somehow you and I reconnected. Somehow you were working on a deep learning company. And then I said, hey, I think NVIDIA has some things that could benefit you, et cetera, et cetera. So, keeping these things that people need in the back of your mind at all times, I think is a key strategy. I've read many books on networking and becoming a connector, and that's something that's always fascinated me, where any person that you meet needs something. Any person that you meet also can give something to someone else. So your job as someone who's networking is to see the needs on either side and then become sort of a matchmaker. And in your exploration, like while you're at Cambridge, you're talking to robotics professors, at any point where they're like, dude, you're an MBA, what the hell are you coming to talk to me about, robotics for? And what was it that led you, even though that was completely orthogonal to corn and soy, and you had a data science background, but what was the main thing for you to explore that? Was it just intellectual curiosity, or did you have a hypothesis of where things would go?
Well, Mark, obviously in these kind of circumstances, it's best to have some kind of commonality or connection point, right?
Okay.
And specifically for the case with the robotics, because it's a good question, I knew that the department was getting into agricultural robotics.
Ah, okay.
Right? So and that was kind of the door opener there to say, what, heard you doing some kind of lettuce harvesting robot, get in, talk to them, and then you see all kinds of other stuff, which really, open your mind. So I think generally, kind of to your point of, making it just, not an extractive relationship, but a kind of two-way conversation, find that common point. In this case, it was, agriculture in a way. But I think, especially now where all of the technologies are converging and sectors converging and becoming more tech-oriented or whatever, there will naturally be more kind of touch points between people in terms of what potential for collaboration is. So, sometimes, you could just reach out to someone on LinkedIn or whatever and not necessarily know for sure what's going to be the potential outcome.
Yes.
I've been amazed though how many times you have a hunch that there is something, and you just dig a slightly deeper and you find out, yes, definitely there's something there. At the very least, people want to know people who seem like, they're dedicated to what they're doing, they're knowledgeable, because everyone, I think, to a certain extent, a lot of people I know want to learn as well.
Yes.
They want to learn, they want to network, they want to connect. So I think, that's where we don't have to feel like networking is some kind of chore or task or whatever. Because, it's just about us learning as well and seeing maybe there is some kind of clear room for collaboration. Maybe there isn't, but who knows? 5-10 years down the line, that doesn't mean that, I might ring up Mark Moyo and say, hey, you know what? I read something about NFTs. And then Mark says, hey, I've already actually started minting some myself. Let's do something, right?
Yes.
So Yeah.
You brought up the time component. And I think for especially the younger generation now, this notion of when will something pay off, I think is very hard to grasp and very hard to be settled with. And even for myself, I feel awkward about it. But the last time I probably saw you was maybe 2006. And we're in 2022. And look how long it took for maybe our careers to go their own way, and now for us to reconnect on some common place, right? And even doing this interview to share some things that you've learned. So I it's quite incredible how life sort of evolves and what can happen. I wanted to dive into a couple of things. So you're a professional trader in the commodities market, specifically corn and soy, and you live and breathe that world. And I think what's kind of interesting, I don't know much about the commodity markets, and in learning some of the things that you shared with me, I find it quite interesting as to why you should be paying attention to global events. So with that being said, what made you shift? Right, you're an expert in this field. You're in banking. You're probably getting paid quite well, which, as long as you're delivering, and you shifted into the startup realm. Tell us about what that was like and why you chose to make that jump.
Yeah, well, that's I guess that's $1 billion question. I think part of it kind of goes back to what we discussed regarding our time in St. Mary's as well, to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
I always had this kind of curiosity of what else could be done and yes, you have the immediate kind of financial rewards of a career in commodities markets or financial markets in general, or banking even. But I think it's quite clear to me that we're living in a really exciting time and a sporting new industry.
Mm-hmm.
And, kind of tying back to your question about, the horizons in a way of when things can actually pay off, it kind of felt that this was the time in a way to actually do something.
I see.
So, it's that doesn't mean that it's the best idea.
Okay.
But in essence, a lot of us, a lot of people are working in industries where, it's almost like legacy industries, things that aren't really built for Web3, let alone Web2 kind of world, let's say. And we could see actually all the opportunities kind of that are presenting themselves. And to me, actually, in my head anyway, maybe I'm incorrect and oversimplifying, but I saw it as a natural progression.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
To kind of getting my feet wet, understanding financial markets. And now actually I could see, that education in a way being applied to tackling some tricky problems.
Mm-hmm.
Both of them, to be clear, whether it's climate change and scaling climate finance, or even, that side of things when it comes to financing farmers, for example. Both of them are kind of market failures that we are addressing, leveraging new data.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, hopefully that helps the financial markets. And obviously the better is that longer term, the rewards potentially on a personal level as well, because that's what your question is really about. The rewards would be greater than what's been, I guess, given up to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's no perfect answer to that, right? Everyone has to it kind of goes back to running your own race. Many people would say, you know what, I would just stay and just trade the markets and go ahead. And there's no reason not to make that judgment. It was just my personal call in a way that, to me, I see where the wind is kind of blowing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is the time to kind of jump on that train, I guess. Because that's where the world and the industry is moving towards.
Absolutely. And as I digest your background over time, and I guess maybe more fortunate to know some of your internal motivations from when you were much younger, and seeing you always had an intense focus. Once you decided you were going to do something, like it was going to get done. And I think all of those facets of you having that very decisive attitude, in addition, diving very deep into a topic, now you become an expert on these markets, and you have the professional credentials to manage a business, scale a business. You have the connections to the actual machine learning personnel at very, very top institutions, by the way. I think, yeah, it makes complete sense as to why you made that jump. And it's very exciting to see that you took a leap of faith to some degree in terms of, I've accumulated all of these things, and now let me go apply them to some new area. And I think once you're successful, a lot of farmers will have to some degree a better life, and will have a much better insight into, hey, how much food are we going to grow this year? Like, how much people are not going to eat, and whose lives can be bettered. So that's quite exciting.
But Mark, there's one thing I want to emphasize, and maybe I should, I kind of downplayed it. There are many different paths towards entrepreneurship, for example, right? And we're all kind of enamored by the prospect of, person comes in, one day, quits their job in the garage somewhere, with one computer on an old dusty table, and this is day one, and we kind of go from there, right?
Yes.
But I mean, there are things like, you can be an entrepreneur within an organization, right? You could be in a big bank, leading an initiative. I think it's entrepreneurship as well, where, you have your team, you're doing some kind of innovation, you're having a new business model within the bank or within a big company, whatever it is. If you're leading that change, that innovation, you have a team with you potentially as well. You could be an entrepreneur, right? Equally, I didn't take the path of being in the garage, and starting something, with a computer. I jumped on a ship which I thought was kind of going in its own way. Yes. Had the people already. I added my element to it, and then we kind of went, right? And now we're spinning out a new company as well, the GEOTree I mentioned, which is tackling a specific problem which we see and we have the expertise to solve. So, point being, I guess, to summarize what I'm trying to say here is, not everyone is going to be a Zuckerberg or a Steve Jobs necessarily.
Yes.
But, we have many, Silicon Valley now, when you look at who's leading the big companies as well, you have people who didn't necessarily found or started or even, were the first set of employees or the first or the third set of employees even, right?
Yes.
So there are different ways you can be, whether it's technology, data science, or entrepreneurship overall. There are many different kinds of angles and ways to kind of get in.
Yeah, and I think a lot about that in starting my own business, seeing my dad, own his own business at home. And I think many people don't really think about payroll and how serious of a pain payroll can be. And, if you are not necessarily aligned with your employees in terms of how you are giving them a particular reward and they're not maybe necessarily pushing on the output side and all the human dynamics that can come into starting your own business. One of the points I kind of wanted to re-highlight in your particular jump into the startup realm is you actually get to work with some of the top people in the field of machine learning, as you kind of mentioned. And what's that experience like working, with really great professors, right? You're not necessarily working with someone who's, all right, I'm a really great coder and first engineer, and they build like this person is established. They run, very serious research labs. So share that experience with us.
You know what, Marcus, goes back to the power again of network as well. Because all of the people who I interact with and are part of the company, it's via, it wasn't via a formal process, of meeting them. It was more about reaching out, meeting someone via contact, that kind of thing. So it's surprising how, as well, people could be generous with their time once someone comes and approaches them seriously and with a serious problem to be tackled. But anyway, back to, to answer your question, in these kind of companies, and you would have seen this in a video, I'm sure, you need kind of complementary skills, right, to a certain extent. So, everyone is not going to be the professor and who's the expert at this. It's good, obviously, really helpful to have one or two if we can,
Yes.
if we can. But you really need to have, different skill sets in the overall company as well. So, whilst I would say yes, you need, it's a key thing from our perspective, because obviously we're very R&D focused, and we do want to have that kind of bleeding edge expertise. But at the same time, I would say, Mark, it depends on, to a certain extent, what the goal is, what kind of company you're trying to build.
Absolutely.
It may not be necessary, right? If I would, sorry, I keep on going back to NFTs, but you have the board right behind you as well.
Yes.
It's coming back to my head. I don't need to have top professors if I were to launch an NFT company. I could, do that probably with my mates who, if we had the correct expertise,
yes.
right, then that could be enough. So it's nuanced, I would say. It really depends on what area you're getting into. We're more on, I would say, like the deep learning part of it, where you really do need to have that academic credential in the company for sure.
Yes.
It is a spectrum like anything. You might have the other end where, it's not necessarily a deep tech problem that you're solving, or deep tech expertise required. So you could literally be maybe, friends out of high school, barely got through university, or if at all, and start something.
Yes.
I think that's the beauty of the world we live in now, Mark, as well.
Yeah, it's cool that you've highlighted that particular spectrum, and we'll see sort of where this podcast goes. And even in my own journey in starting this podcast, I've met many great people along the way, some within my network, and sort of expanding your network and just learning about all of the different ways that you can build brand, or you can get connected. So it's cool that you highlight that. So in the last segment of the podcast, we've had a deep dive on your career and kind of learned about maybe some of your mental strategies that you sort of employed as you went back and forth, and how that entire culmination of work experiences led to you now leading a very interesting machine learning startup, or two machine learning startups to some degree. And what two pieces of advice would you give to a high schooler, a college person, and a professional, in terms of, it could be just any general advice, in my opinion. And the reason why I usually like to ask this question is, it's called time compression. And when people decide to make certain decisions, they either go learn the lessons themselves, or they hear someone like give the lesson and like, okay, let me just grab that, navigate all of those learning experiences and accelerate to some degree on their own path.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's there's a bit of a poison chalice element to this, Mark, trying to give advice, especially if, I think, as we get to the high school level, because of how things are evolving. You never know actually how relevant the advice is going to be 10 years. Just to give an example, imagine if someone was trying to give us advice back when we were in St. Mary's about what to do in 2022, right? I mean, career-wise, for example, I think they'll be pretty off the mark. But anyway, I'll give it a snap, right? So, I'll start with the professionals. I think as a professional, whatever your career is, whether you're in a bank or you're a fisherman or whatever it is, literally any career, I think, obviously if there are other areas that interest you, you can, feed that knowledge to a certain extent, or feel that urge to learn about other things. But, there really is a premium and something to be said about trying to be the best you can at what you already have that career path in. Because once you have that credibility and you've really ascended in a short space of time and it's recognized, then you never know how, that can translate to you. Even if you change careers later on, you can still kind of, I won't say live off that legacy, but go back to that as a validation in a way that you're someone who should be taken seriously. Right? Because, you know how it is, Mark. It's to a certain extent, as your career progresses, those really are kind of the badges you wear to a certain extent for the rest of your life, right? It's like, we can't change the fact of what the schools we went to at this age and, you have a PhD now, I mean, that's something that's going to be with you for the rest of your life, right? So
Yes.
I think whether it's in academia or in your job or profession, I think there really is something to be said about trying to ascend to the highest level and be recognized, for that kind of, as a leader in a way, or someone who should be taken seriously as an expert or whatever in that particular domain you have, been in currently, I would say.
Right.
So I think as we get, a bit earlier on in let's say, your the stage a person we're talking to, let's say it's high school or early university, for example, I think that you kind of touch on the education system, right? And that could be the subject matter for a whole entire, whole separate podcast. This is something actually where
let's keep our jobs.
Even when I was, this is something where it really is concerned, especially as a father now as well. From my perspective, there's a kind of saying that I'm going to, misquote it now, but we're teaching like Gen Z children. They're being taught by millennials or boomers, in like post World War schools. They're being taught a Victorian system, right? Yes. So anyway, point being, this is kind of to what you were saying before, I guess. The education system is made for a different time, right? Yeah. And we can recognize that. It's probably not going to give you all the skills required for the career that you want, and even probably the career that's most likely you're going to be doing, right? And when I think about it, it's almost like even back when I started trading, a lot, to be frank, a lot of the education you've done kind of goes out the window, right? Okay. It's not, very little is actually applicable, and you really have to zoom in on those specific skills, like maybe being able to analyze data, being able to do a bit of coding here and there, being able to read a report and summarize the findings, being able to make a PowerPoint presentation, right? All these, being able to use Excel,
Yeah.
I remember actually the first time I interned, right? I spent a whole night, I didn't know anything about Excel, right? I've been studying, totally different. I've been programming stuff in R language or filling out or calculating maths on a page or something like that. You turn up to your job, you have to make a financial model in Excel, right? I remember just spending a night doing something, and then the next morning I, deleted a cell and everything just stopped working because I hadn't locked the cells, right? So all these things, you have to be aware that the skills that you are learning in school might not be that applicable in the real world, right? So I think a couple of things to how do we unpack this issue and solve it. One, mentors could be very important. So I would say whether it's in your family network or whoever else, mentor, you could directly message people as well. Who knows? They might reply. I've had people reply who I didn't think would reply before, and they've become very good friends, advisors to the company as well. People who I just kind of cold called in a way, said, "Hey, saw one of your videos. Would like to meet sometime." It's amazing how things progress from here. But having good mentors, I think, could be a good bridge for you to understand, what's actually relevant in the real world, right?
Yes.
Doing that, trying to get some work experience as well, right? During your summer, let's go back to the Caribbean, right? I mean, we did hang out a lot in Tobago and, we did all that stuff, right? But I would say maybe if I were to go back, even back then, maybe it would have been useful as well to spend a bit of time, right, to also try and get a summer internship somewhere, getting a bit more work experience, maybe learning a bit of Excel, learning what other systems, are used in the corporate environment, getting your beak wet to certain extent, right? Well, understanding what skills are required and I could try and improve on. So that's another element, I would say, work experience, networking, mentoring. But I think also, if there is something that, you might do your own research, you might think this might be the next big thing, right? It could be, a trend you're picking up. Learn about it, right? No one is stopping you from actually deep diving. If someone had said a few years ago that NFTs would be big, and they did a deep dive into it and they started to do something, then they would have probably been doing okay right now, right? So you never know what's going to be the next big thing. The great thing is you have access to everything. If I want to learn about, like I said, machine learning or NFTs or anything in an afternoon, it's possible. That wasn't possible, back before. So, just remember there are no barriers, right? Like you said very well, Mark, to actually learning, right? It's like we have an open resource here. So if you want to learn about something that you think could be more relevant than what's in the formal education system, or it's something you have a passion for, or or something that you think could be big, just do it, right? There's spend the time, dedicate yourself, maybe, even if there's some personal sacrifice in terms of not being able to go out as much or whatever, just because you're dedicating yourself to that, then why not? Because an amazing thing we have seen as business models have shifted, you never know how you can monetize as well, right? Things, people are, as you say, you use that word brand, Mark. People are, doing brands, making themselves into brands, and monetizing in different ways. And as we move into different phases in our technology and cycle, let's say, you never know what door could be open to the people who have actually spent the time to do the homework and learn a bit outside of the colored lines, I would say, as well. Right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of a summary of some of what I would think could be some useful advice. 99% of it may not be, but hopefully some is.
Yeah, I wanted to highlight some of the things that you said there. You don't need someone's permission to learn. You absolutely do not need someone's permission to learn. I think the sad part of the education system, and I don't know if it was necessarily an intention, is I think we've been taught that I need to go to an institution, obtain a particular certificate, then I am good enough to be useful to the marketplace. Whereas if you had access to those same lectures and things that you would have been seeing that whole time, how can you still leverage that same mechanism of learning and still take yourself out to the marketplace and prove value? So it was a good one you highlighted there. So my last quick question there would be, what 3 books do you recommend? It could be anything.
One book, I would say there are a few books.
Sure.
But one really, eye-opening book for me anyway was The Signal and Noise by Nate Silver. And, it's I'm sure there are data scientists on this, or people interested in data science listening to the podcast. I would say for anyone who has an interest in the use of data for different applications, Nate Silver's book and other books by him, fantastic. I think so. Nate really came to the fore as an early predictor that Obama would win the elections in the US.
I see.
As a background in actually using statistics for baseball, sabermetrics. So like Moneyball kind of stuff for anyone who's watched Moneyball, the movie. He's someone who's very much into sports statistics, went and, did a prediction on the US election, was spot on when most people were saying, no, Obama was not going to win. And then in the book, he also kind of demonstrates different applications, whether it's weather forecasting or whatever, of statistics and the power of, the new methods and capabilities as well. So that's one book. I would say another book I would recommend, Everybody Lies. Or is it Everyone Lies? Okay. I can actually cheat a bit. It's right on my right next to me on my table. Everybody Lies by Seth Stevenson, Devowitz. If you read that book as well, kind of similar to Nate Silver to a certain extent, but it kind of goes beyond just statistics, but different the internet and the use of data as well, I think, and how I guess these days everyone is kind of a bit more aware of the power of the internet and social media and everything like that. But I think in a very clever way, the book kind of stitches together some of the stories about, the use of the internet, what information could be derived, statistically, but also some of how those data are being used as well. So that's another book I'd recommend. And I think one last one, potentially probably for people more skewed towards entrepreneurship, and a bit of a controversial author because of some of the stuff he said. But Peter Thiel's 0 to 1.
That was interesting. Yeah.
It's an interesting book, and I think if you want to go down that route of entrepreneurship, I think that's an interesting one for sure. Tech entrepreneurship in particular. I could cheat a bit. There's some non-tech books as well, which really inspired me. Monkey Business is one. It's you look it up, you see Monkey Business. Hilarious book about investment banking. If you want a book that literally you laugh out loud reading it, that was one. It's a bit old now, but still, I'm sure pretty funny stuff there. And Liar's Poker, as well as another more finance book about a trading floor. And
what book is that? Sorry?
Liar's Poker.
Liar's Poker. Okay.
By Michael Lewis. Yeah.
Huh.
So Michael Lewis, funny enough, wrote like Moneyball and some others, quite a few other books as well. But Liar's Poker is like, when I got into trading, that was like the Bible, something you had to read. A lot of characters when I started in Citi actually either knew some of the people from Liar's Poker because Citibank had been formed, with the Solomon Brothers, which is the bank that's in Liar's Poker, was now part of Citibank. So we had people who were ex-Solomon Brothers people still there talking about the characters in the book. But I think, Liar's Poker is another kind of classic from my days in finance.
Very cool. Perfect. So, I wanted to say I'm very grateful and happy that, 17, if I could do maths today, 15 years later or 16 years later, we're doing an interview, right? And I'm going to send this message to some of our high school teachers to say, hey, we didn't turn out too bad overall, even though we
to be determined.
We tortured your lives while we were there, but I think we made it out okay. And so once again, man, thanks for the time, and I know you're a busy man, and we hope to see what you're doing on your mission.
Well, Mark, I just want to say, because like I said, I don't know if everyone recognizes where you are in terms of NVIDIA, but as I said before, between us, NVIDIA is on the road, I think, to be, probably the major or, probably the biggest tech company in the world. So I think, people should recognize that as well. And your journey, I think, will inspire a lot of people, I'm sure. So yeah, well done to you.
Appreciate the time, man. All right, we'll link later.
All right. Thanks a lot, Mark. All right.
Take care.